Hello everybody. As automotive legends go, few can match the mighty original Honda NSX. In fact, of its day, I think the only one that can come close and potentially beat it is the McLaren F1. Because over the last 3.5 decades, the NSX has acquired a number of different stories, some of which are spurious, some of which are dubious, some of which are outright ludicrous, and some of which might even be true. For example, if you were to ask your local pub board to tell you some things about the NSX, they would naturally tell you this is the car that was so good it took Ferrari 10 years to catch up, and that every one of its aluminium panels was hand-hammered in the fires of Mount Doom by none other than Ayrton Senna himself. And so there is just one key question to ask. Is this a hero worth meeting? Is this a car that, if you're used to modern day performance, is doomed to disappoint? Or is there something about the original NSX that now, perhaps even more than ever, makes it a car worth buying? Well, today, courtesy of a lovely chap called Jeffrey, I'm driving an Immaculate 18,000 mile 1991 car, and I intend to find out. So then, let's try and do our best to separate the fact from the fiction. You've no doubt got a little bit of information about the NSX, and if you happen to have a lot, I'd ask you to hop into the comment section and share it with the rest of the class. I love doing these videos, I love driving these cars, and I also love learning as much as I can, because this is not my first drive of an NSX, and with some luck, nor will it be my last. The car's life actually started way back in the mid-1980s and was born of all things out of a city car project, where Honda, for reasons known I think only to them, decided to take a small little hatchback and chuck the engine in the back. I'm not sure that was ever intended for production, but all of the test drivers had so much fun they felt there were legs to this idea, and so development began on what was first called the NPX and later the NSX, for New Sports Car Experimental. At the time, their target was the mighty Ferrari 328, but by the time the car launched, it instead had to go up against the 348. It may be the case that that was one of Ferrari's lower moments, but still, the achievement of what Honda created cannot be understated. For here was a car built with extensive use of aluminium and other exotic materials. It had titanium conrods in its rather unusual 90-degree V6 engine, which also featured then brand spanking new VTEC technology along with variable length intake, meaning that not only did it have a good spread of torque, but it also revved like an Italian supercar. The red line here being a nice 8,000 RPM. And as it happens, the addition of Honda's now famous VTEC was a fairly last-minute one. Initially, it was meant to do without it entirely, and in that guise, the engine made some 250 horsepower. With it, power rose to 270, and torque, very modestly, by about 2 pounds-feet, up to 210, but crucially, across a broader spread. The addition of the VTEC heads, which increased the height of the engine, then forced the engineers to tilt it back by some 5 degrees, giving it a very interesting look in the engine bay, which stuck with the car throughout its incredibly long production life. The car launched in 1989, though a few earlier examples do exist. Honda UK, in fact, have a 1988 registered car, a pre-production development vehicle with a 3-speed automatic gearbox. Of course, today, this 5-speed manual is the one that everybody wants, though sadly, the production 4-speed automatic is fairly commonplace. And if you ever see a suspiciously cheap NSX, I'd wager that's the box that it's got. Still, at this point in time, the Ferrari of the day, the 348, didn't offer an automatic of any description, so if for whatever reason you couldn't have a manual, you could have an NSX. The car was then given its first major upgrade in 1997 when the engine grew from 3 to 3.2 litres and power rose from 270 horses to a nice round 300. Though word on the street is, Honda were always modest with their specifications. The gearbox also grew an extra ratio for a total of 6, though the automatic, I believe, remained unchanged. Then, in late 2001, for the 2002 model year, the car saw its major visual overhaul, with the famous pop-up headlights being ditched in favour of the then required integrated ones. And this then took the car through to 2005, by which point Ferrari were now offering the F430, and the NSX, try as it might, was very much out of date. But today, all of these cars are old, and so you view them a very different way. Now, of course, if at the end of this video you decide to go to the classifieds and pick out your favourite classic Japanese supercar, then make sure you use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases from around the globe to give you all the information you want to know on any potential used car purchase, including potential accident damage, mileage discrepancies, something very important with these, import status, or involvement in things like fire and theft. You need just a registration number or a VIN. It'll take only 60 seconds, and for 20% off the service, don't forget to use my discount code JayEmm. And I must be honest, it is on the looks front that I've always had some issues with the NSX. From the front, and seeing it today in my rearview mirror, I think it has to be one of the best looking cars ever made. In here, though that front end might look rather flat and featureless, you actually get quite sharply pronounced edges. And perhaps that is because this F-16 inspired cockpit is so round with so much glass in it. It's amazing, this. Compared to just about any other modern day sports car, visibility is sensational. It's also fairly narrow, very easy to place, and there is nothing whatsoever daunting about driving this. It's magnificent. And I'm just about to go past its lovely owner, who I think deserves a bit of a flyby. A Ferrari of the time would be difficult, pernickety, hate you when it was cold, be tricky when it was warm, and they're things that, although I'm used to, can at all times remind you they're a little bit tricksy. The NSX, nothing of the sort. But of course, that also meant people criticised it for being a little flat, a little dull. I've never really thought that, but I've also never felt it was the prettiest car. Front end, gorgeous. Side profile, not so bad. But that rear, it's alright. And the rear three quarters, I think it's quite ungainly. It's a very long thing, the very cab forward driving position. And because they've put a reasonable sized boot on the back of it, it looks like it's about a foot too long. It's one of the very few cars of this ilk that if I were to have one, I would modify it. I would have to do things to it because I'd want it to look just a little spicier. Now, over the years, they did do sporty variants, the NSXR, NSX Type S, Type S Zero, and later another NSXR. But here's the problem. For a long time, the appeal of an NSX was the fact it's kind of like a Ferrari, only it won't break, and it'll be cheaper, not just to run, but also to buy. Now though, the turns have tabled, and the situation is as confusing as a stupidly placed commercial. And what do I mean by that? Well, prices of NSXs are all over the place, but if you were to try and pick up something like this, a gorgeous, very tidy, ignore the road grime example of an early NA1 car with the 5-speed manual and the manual steering. Electric power assistance only appeared as an option later, and one that honestly I'd never be interested in. This would command potentially a 6-figure sum, for which you could quite easily get yourself into a manual Ferrari 360, an F355, certainly a 348, potentially a 308, 328, an Audi R8 V8 manual, Audi R8 V10 manual, a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's before you start talking about 911s. and those are all cars I've got quite a bit of experience with. The NSX though, nowhere near as much. Controversially, I have driven on a few occasions the second generation, the modern car, the NC one, and I love that. And I know on paper I shouldn't. It's big, it's heavy, it's complicated, it's filled with technology, but it's a fantastic drive. And the truth is, every time previously that I've driven an original shape NSX, be it the early or the late one, it's just been a disappointment. And the most confusing of disappointments too, because this is a car that you would expect won't be the quickest thing out there. It never claimed to be. But you'd think because it's a Honda, it's lightweight, it's agile, that it'll be a great steer, the suspension will be set up perfectly, and it will be a dynamic thing. Thing is though, when I've driven them, I've just come away thinking I'm impressed by how fast they are, but not by anything else. Today though, right here and now, something is different. And I don't think it's me, I think it is this car. Now as ever, this engine is an absolute delight, and the gearbox pitch perfect. It does what I want, when I want, and no, it doesn't have buckets of power, but it gives me everything that it has whenever I ask. And taking it to that 8,000 RPM red line, it's a joy. Though sadly, the long gearing means that I can only do it in the lower gears, and even in second, I have to be a little bit careful, because I do like my license, I need it for my job. The view out, of course, has always been spectacular, and I don't even mind the fact that the interior here isn't quite as fancy as a Ferrari's, because the fact is, it works, it doesn't really creak or rattle, it's very much of its time, but I adore it. This belt line that runs through the middle of the thing is amazing, and I've always had a soft spot for these weird controls behind the steering wheel. I like to call the indicator the world's fanciest toilet lever, because that's what it feels like. You've even got cruise control in here. Ferrari didn't do that till the 2010s. It's amazing. And I kind of like the suspension in this car. Now I had a good chat with Jeffrey, the owner, before I drove this car, partly because I wanted to know a little bit more about it and him, but also because I wanted to check a few things. When you get a car like this that has as few miles as it does, it had 13,000 on it when he got it 8 years ago, and now just 18,000, there's things that people often skimp on, and tyres are the big one. It's currently sat on a set of Yokohamas that are about 7 years old, and they're doing a very good job. More importantly, they're wrapped around the original wheels, which are just 15 inches at the front and 16 at the back. 205 wide up that end, 225 at the back. Narrower than in my S2000. It's crazy, right? But it actually feels okay. I'm not going to push it, I'm not going to be silly, it's still a little greasy out there today because it rained heavily yesterday, but this car gives me oodles of confidence, and so doesn't worry me. And to those tyres I think are important, because the last time I drove an NSX, it was on a set of Yokohama AD08 RS. And I later found out there is something about that generation of RS that meant they were very, very stiff and really did compromise the car. Now as it happens, these always rode a lot firmer than I would have expected. In fact, I would say this is kind of 430 Scuderia firm. Legend will tell you, and I think there is truth to this, that Ayrton Senna, when he did spend time with the chassis engineers, told them to stiffen the thing up. And not just in terms of suspension, but the chassis itself. And it was on account of this input that they apparently did, making the car some 50% stiffer than it was originally going to be. And what's most impressive about it is the fact it's still incredibly light. How light? Well, Honda claim 1,370 kilos, which is impressive. For some context, that's 100 kilos lighter than the Ferrari 348. That's 10 kilos lighter than a 360 Challenge Stradale, which was then the first generation of Ferrari to be built out of aluminium. This incidentally is not all, but almost all aluminium, using it extensively for not just the chassis, but also the suspension components and certain body panels too. Very impressive. Now, like all cars, I decided to check Honda's weight claim. I have a little independent website that I found a few years ago, and on it you'll get manufacturer claimed weights versus actual weighed weights. So for this, Honda claim 1,370 kilos. Actual weight 1,360. amazing. Absolutely amazing. Almost never have I found a manufacturer actually overquoted the weight of their car. But such, I suppose, is the Japanese way. And yeah, sure, on this road, I can sense an element of firmness in here, but I have also driven a Challenge Stradale down this very road, and there were sections where that scraped along the floor. This section, in fact. In this, though, I don't have the same problem, and that means I can enjoy it that much more. Fine. Even better, this steering, not particularly quick, but it's definitely more feelsome than the last NSX that I drove. Combine it with that engine and this chassis, I could spend the rest of the afternoon here and be a very, very happy man. Also unusual for cars of its day, it does actually have traction control. I didn't think it did, but I can tell it does because there's a little button down here for it, marked TCS. Though, as with all cars of the era, I wouldn't really trust it. It won't be particularly good, nor, to be honest, is it particularly necessary. The same goes for the later optional electric steering. Even at car park speeds, this is fine. It's not heavy, it's not difficult, likely thanks to the fact it's very light, the weight is chiefly over the rear, and those front tyres are incredibly narrow. And it's got aircon, a cassette player with Dolby. As it happens, this is Jeffrey's second NSX. The first he bought from his neighbour. It was functionally exactly the same as this, just 1 year younger, and the neighbour had owned it from new. Jeffrey then persuaded him to part with it. He had it, drove it and enjoyed it, though it was much higher mileage and a little bit battle worn. So eventually he decided to upgrade to this super low mile example. And when I asked him, he did confess he kind of regret that, because the joy of having the older car with the miles on was that he used it. This then, he's been very nervous about. Okay, he's done 5,000 miles in 8 years, and in a Ferrari, that'd be an achievement. In a Honda, somewhat less so. And it is for that reason that he is now thinking of parting with the car. And if anybody is thinking of a really, really nice early NSX, I can tell you, this one, from this seat at least, it's good. You've even got creature comforts like electric seats, and that you certainly wouldn't have got in a 348. What a thing. From outside, doesn't really sound like all that much. This car is completely standard. From in here though, it's lovely. And I know there will always be people that look down on a Honda V6. But the fact is, it's a cracking engine. This is good. Really, really good. The dynamic weak point of this car, I'm told, is the brakes. And that, to be honest, I can live with. First off, because if you're bugged by it, you can upgrade them. Secondly, because for normal road use, I'm sure they're fine. And third, because it was kind of common for cars of this age. They just didn't have great brakes. Ask owners of the McLaren F1, and they'll tell you they're not really up to the task. And as it happens, it was allegedly the NSX that provided the inspiration for the suspension on the F1. And if that's not praise, I don't know what is. Although that being said, I've not driven a McLaren F1, it could be rubbish. So if you've got a McLaren F1 and you would like some validation, please do drop me a line. My email address is in the description down below. But non-F1 owners may also apply. I love the F355, it's one of my all-time favourite cars. But in terms of steering, this is definitely better. And I don't think I could have said that the last couple of times I drove an NSX. Maybe it's the tyres, maybe it's the condition of the suspension, maybe it's the geometry. But there's something about this that's just working. That initial turn-in is a little bit slow, but common for cars this era. It's got a manual rack, that's very, very normal. But the weighting's there, the texture is sublime. This is gorgeous, really good. Over those lumps and bumps there, the suspension takes it in its stride. It has something called a compliance pivot or something like that in it, I can't remember. Jeffrey was telling me about it, and it means when you hit really difficult sections of road, the car takes it a lot better than you think it might. It does still have some fairly chunky arch gap, and I'd always be tempted with this to maybe put some slightly more modern shaped wheels on it, bigger, better selection of rubber. I would be worried about ruining this thing though. The sweet spot for me has always been the post-97 cars, so the ones that look like this, but with the bigger engine and the 6-speed box. Fact is, though, I don't think there's much really wrong with this. Power out of a bend nicely, take it easy as the crest comes through, and back on the juice, and we're through. What a joy. Oh, I love this thing so much. I'm also enjoying giving Jeffrey the odd flyby too. Hopefully he's appreciating that. Now this is actually a very, very timely review because only a week ago I was at the Motorist, fantastic venue just outside Leeds. If you haven't been, go. I was hosting a quiz and I will be doing another one. And a gentleman approached me, lovely American fellow, who has a first generation Audi R8 V10 manual, great car. But his dream is one of these. And his question was a simple one. It was the one I posed at the beginning of this video. Will it disappoint? Before today, I would have said yes. Now the fact is, in terms of value for money, only you can decide whether it's worth it or not. And I'm not convinced these are going to continue rising in price. They did so before a lot of other Japanese stuff, but they also haven't risen in quite the same way in recent times. Maybe that's partly because in America they did get these, the Acura NSX, whereas for stuff like the R34 Skyline, they didn't. So the 25-year rule was a big thing. Not too fond of the clutch, it's a little bit soft, a little bit high. Turning circles also a bit rubbish, but visibility is so good it's not quite the problem you might think. In terms of practicality, you've got a glove box, which is nice, that aforementioned boot, which is a slightly odd shape so that you can get a spare wheel in there if you need it. The front incidentally is taken up by the space saver spare, but as supercars go, I'd drive this anywhere. And it's a Honda. I'd trust it to get me there. Are these all going to be perfect? Are they all going to be completely reliable? Maybe not. They're 35 years old in some cases, but you can get bits for them. They are available. They do have specialists, and it's certainly, I think, going to be cheaper to run than, say, a Ferrari of the vintage. Is it as exotic? Is it as exciting? Does it sound quite as good as a 360 or a 355? No, not really. Is the interior as nice? No, it's not. But it's a different experience. And it's one that I don't think will disappoint. Yeah, the R8 V10 is magic, but this is special. So you know what? To the man I met, if you're thinking about it, and you can do it, and do it comfortably, I know he was talking about getting an automatic and doing a manual swap. If you can do that, do it. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Jeffrey for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.